We are going to talk about developing people, business and communities, and how the Cultural Development Fund has helped culture and creativity really run through those kind of three elements of the lives of the places that we all live and work in. And back against the venue, I think you can see it in the ceiling of this place, because if you look up above you, there's words all over it. There's astronomy, and down the end there's agriculture and engineering. And the one in the middle, which is clearly the most important one, there's four words there: painting, drama, music, and I think poetry. So we've got art and culture running straight through what this city thinks it's about, and I think we've got four excellent panellists who are going to tell the story of how that's also true in their places. So we have Dr. Stephen Dobson to my left from the University of Leeds. We have Alice Heggie from Creative Estuary at the end. We have Jabba Riaz, who's here wearing the uniform of the Worcester Mela. The rest of us don't have any branded kit, I'm afraid. And we've also got Professor Chris Bennewith from the University of Plymouth. So an excellent panel. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they've got to say. And I will just hand over straight away for a quick introduction to the work that's gone on in Wakefield from Stephen.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi everybody. Just as a very quick introduction, I've had a career of two halves. For 15 years I've worked in arts, culture and heritage, and for 15 years I've worked in business management and entrepreneurship. And so for me personally, it was a fantastic opportunity to work with Wakefield Council on the Creative Leadership Programme, because it really gave the opportunity to sort of bring those worlds together, and something that I'm particularly passionate about is helping to reduce the gap in cultures between the notion of the artist, the creative, the maker, and the idea of a kind of business startup, which, to be fair, many artists prefer not to identify with that moniker of being an entrepreneur. And the Creative Leadership Programme was very much about, we heard this morning, about that building the confidence to be able to consider oneself a leader. And again, that's something that many creative people can struggle with slightly. That confidence in being able to step up and say, yes, I am a leader of, in my community. That's particularly the case for our mentors. And again, a lot of my work was to persuade some of the inspirational leaders that we had on the programme that they were indeed inspirational leaders. One in particular, Karanjit Kaur Verdi, who is the director of South Asian Arts UK and now MBE. Fantastic figure in Yorkshire and a real role model for me. And I really had to persuade her that she was an inspirational figure, that she was somebody that should be seen as an inspirational figure to our participants on the programme. And I was really pleased that I managed to persuade her that she had a real value to play, which she evidently does. The Creative Leadership Programme had a cohort of about 15 people in this sort of pilot phase, and it's been a fantastic sort of collaboration between Leeds Uni and Wakefield Council, which still continues. We still have members of those, we still have those participants that were involved in the Creative Leadership Programme, providing live briefs to students, managing students to sort of help them with business development, working with our earth and environment, so looking at hydropower in the Hepworth Gallery. So these partnerships have really continued, and it's something that I think is often difficult to capture, those, not just the immediate impacts, but those longer running impacts, those ripples that happen throughout any of these sorts of programs.
Brilliant, thanks Stephen, that's great. And it's great to hear how the work you're doing is really focused on giving people confidence to go out and be part of a developing business community. I'm going to hand on to Alice now, so over to you.
Yes, I'm Alice Heggie. I'm the Skills Development Manager for Creative Estuary over in Kent and Essex. I was tasked with leading our project named Regeneration 2031, which had sort of two related objectives. One was to upskill and train young creatives aged 16 to 25 and ready them for a career in the creative and cultural industries, kind of recognising that the traditional routes or the current routes of apprenticeships and degree level training don't necessarily work for everyone. So we were looking at and experimenting with new models for engaging those skills with young people. And the second half of that was to support local, small, micro businesses and freelancers to grow their business or practice. And we did that latter by developing and funding new entry-level roles in these businesses or with these freelancers, and work with them to hire new creative talent into those roles, giving the young people the first step into the creative and cultural industries, and the business owners or the artists that space, that extra pair of hands to grow. Those placements were long term. The shortest one was 6 months, the longest one was 18 months, and no experience or previous qualifications were required. So it was really kind of accessible, equitable recruitment process. 5 of the 6 training programs we ran were really around developing sort of creative production skills in local young people. So groups across the estuary came together within creative and cultural organisations to learn how to produce creativity, and that could be producing their own events, working towards a collaborative event, or working towards an exhibition, or working towards a new commission of artwork. And alongside that, there was kind of embedded training where they were learning the skills like freelancing and risk assessments and budgeting and fundraising. So they were really applying their learning in real time on real projects that they can then point to after the project to say, I delivered that, giving them that experience, that real world experience of what it's like to work in the industry. And the 5th of the 6th programme that we ran was a creative entrepreneurship programme. We had the same kind of thing that you were just talking about the kind of disconnect between, and I think it's really just the language of business and the language of creativity. They're doing the same things, but how we talk about it is different. And we kind of tested a model of, in kind of, I suppose, a graduate scheme model where we worked with a local FE college to support some of their college leavers into self-employment straight out of leaving their level 3 qualifications. So they had a training programme on how to be an entrepreneur, and we gave them a little bit of seed funding to get their creative business off the ground. We've actually just wrapped up our video. That's our website just there. It's 10 minutes long, so when you've got 10 minutes, go onto our site and have a look at the video, because that will tell you more about what we've been up to than I could in a couple of minutes.
Brilliant, thanks, Alice. And interesting to hear, following on from what Steve was saying about working with the business community, kind of more generally, you've got that specific focus on a group of young people within the estuary. I'm going to pass on to Jabba now, who's going to talk to us about Worcester Mela.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I have got a speech written, but I think I'm going to go off piste and talk from the heart. If there was ever an example of imposter syndrome, then you're looking at imposter syndrome right here. And in terms of where, if you'd have said 2 years ago that you will be leading and founding an arts organisation that has won a Royal Television Society award, that has done a community festival for the first time in 25 years in this city, that has commissioned a piece of artwork to recognise the BAME community and the disproportionate effect that had at Worcestershire Royal Hospital, and then gone on further to do that across the other 2 acute hospitals in the county, as well as doing a professionally led launch at the University of Worcester Art House. You'd have quite easily slapped me with a wet fish and woke me up in the morning and told me, keep on dreaming. But that's effectively what's happened along this process. I mean, 2 years ago, I walked into Seven Arts' building, saying, I've got a vision for a Worcester Mela. Those that don't know what a Mela is, it's a community get-together, something like a summer fete, if you can imagine, in an Indian subcontinent. That's the loosest form of representation. All these happens across the country, up and down, and major cities. Worcester's a little bit behind, so we needed to bring that up to speed. We hadn't done one in the last 25 years here, hence the need for kind of doing that. Obviously, COVID put paid to our plan, so we had to rethink what Mela meant. So we approached it slightly differently. We started off with let's tell the story of settlers within the city, how they came to here, what made them move to a sleepy outlying city called Worcester, honestly, in terms of what were their motivations, how they were brought to here. So we got to work. So we produced this community documentary just telling their story. And what we really found is that a lot of the time we get this impression that people from the South Asian community or minority communities are closed, don't really want to engage. But it's how you approach them, what message are you trying to get out of them, and how you kind of engage with them. So we got them in a setting that they were familiar with and were be able to relate with, and we found that we had hours and hours of footage. And this footage was obviously made by James Sylvanus here, who's the filmmaker, and he did an absolutely brilliant job. Really captured the mood of the people that were speaking, and that was translated. And we, trying to be Steven Spielberg, I really wanted to trying to play that role play. Really wanted this kind of outcome. And the producer that we brought on board, having no experience on there, said, "Listen, all this stuff will come out naturally within the film." And lo and behold, you just could not imagine the output that we got within that film. So we'd done that piece. Then the second piece was actually Mela is really a happy occasion. It's a really happy, joyful occasion, and we couldn't move into that period without kind of acknowledging the dark period we were in for the last couple of years. So we said, well, what's the next best thing? We know the government figures were showing the disproportionate effect of COVID on BME communities. So we thought, actually, we need to kind of acknowledge those frontline workers and those people that have suffered as a result of this. Kind of a gesture and a gift to the NHS and all those who sacrificed their life. So we went about producing a art piece at the hospital, which was, it was loosely based around the four flowers of the Indian subcontinent, the national flowers of the subcontinent. And because obviously the NHS is far broad in representation, we included a flower for Africa. So I wonder if we could just play.
So I want to thank the Worcester Mela and our main network here at Worcestershire Acute Hospitals for this fantastic project, celebrating life, commemorating the lives lost amongst the people of the county and our staff during the COVID pandemic over the last 2.5 years, and also the lives saved during that time by our hospitals and health services across the country and the world. Thank
So that kind of encapsulates what we want to leave a legacy piece, something for people to remember, an unloved courtyard within the central hospital here now that is really vibrant space for people to go and reflect and enjoy their lunch, something more lasting than a one-day festival. Obviously the next part of that was then obviously the festival itself, in terms of producing that, something Worcester that I'd never seen about, and it was the hottest day of the year. It was the Worcester show traditionally. If you don't mind me saying this, cucumber sandwich brigade territory, a lot of how big is your vegetables and that sort of thing. So we needed to liven it up a little bit, right? So we did it in our way, and the impact that it had on the show, I think we had a throughput on average about 15,000 to 20,000 visitors to the show, and in our tent was the busiest all day long, because we just catered for every part and made it as engaging as possible. And we've never seen, ladies in their 40s or 50s from the South Asian community any of the festivals, and that's what we've managed to achieve, that mind shift that actually these festivals that we do run, if you make it welcoming, if you make it open and understanding and relevant, that you will get it. But I could go on all day, and I'm sure some of your questions will answer this, but going back to what Stephen's point is, without the mentoring, without the help and the support and the encouragement from CDF, from our partners, from the university, from all these organisations that brought into that vision, I wouldn't be here where I'm delivering all this. We've managed to get, in that short period of time, literally from 2020 to now, £150,000 worth of funding. We're on the process of submitting our second Arts Council bid, which is over an 18-month period. We've submitted our CIO application and have got dreams of becoming NPO status.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jabba. And this is about learning, but it's also about celebrating as well. So thank you for sharing your pride in what you've achieved as well. That's really appreciated. So I'm going to hand on to Chris Bennewith from the University of Plymouth now.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to follow that vibrant example there, Mike. It was quite dry and boring now. Afternoon, real pleasure to be here. It was quite emotional watching that video back as well, sort of seeing everything that we've done down in Plymouth and having some colleagues here as well. So it was lovely to watch that back again. So I'm currently the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Business at the University of Plymouth. I was the head of school when we started this project, and I was one of the individuals, along with Lindsay and Nina at the back there, that kind of pulled the bid together initially. So it was my pleasure to be involved in it from the start, and it's a real pleasure to kind of be here today to listen to other projects and what others have been doing. And I'm sorry I missed this morning's sessions as well. My car was snowed in. There's nothing like digging your car out of a snowdrift to start the day. So you've probably already heard from Lindsay this morning about all the amazing work that's going on down at the Market Hall. But I just wanted to start, before I talk about the university's work, just to kind of contextualise what we've been doing at the university through the kind of intent behind the sort of Plymouth CDF bid. So we had a focus on sort of creative cultural industries, new technologies around immersive media and digital fabrication, and the key kind of economic pillars, I suppose, of the kind of region, the more established key economic pillars, which were health, marine industries, massive down there, and it has been kind of culture and tourism sector. So we had this kind of Venn diagram. I'm a big fan of Venn diagrams. We had a big Venn diagram, and sort of CDF sat in the middle of those three circles, and that was really kind of that was really the kind of mantra, I suppose, the kind of philosophy through which we ran the whole project. And so the idea was that by injecting kind of creativity, creative individuals into kind of businesses which were from that were not creative, but were from more traditional industries like the marine sector, from the health sector, by combining that with these kind of creative individuals and these technologies, that we would sort of see what kind of innovation we could drive by getting people to think a bit differently. I think the kind of other thing, and again, Lindsay might have mentioned this, the other key to what we did is we sort of treated Plymouth as a kind of creative ecosystem. So we looked at all of these kind of niches which need to be nurtured at the same time in order for the kind of ecosystem to be kind of raised up at the same time, and to try and look at the creation of this sort of new creative economy that we were sort of hoping would sort of emerge out of the kind of interventions that we were kind of creating. So at the university, we mostly focused on business development and the provision of creative capabilities and capacities that businesses might not already have. So this included the kind of creative and intellectual capital of both our staff and students, and also access to some of the new resources which we built, not from CDF money, ours as a whole revenue bid that we put together, but access to our new digital fabrication immersive media labs, which key very nicely into what the market hall is also doing. So there's a partnership developed there through this bid, which continues. So there were lots of things we were doing, leadership programs, graduate shows, but I think one of the particularly successful elements of what we did were what we termed our innovative placement schemes, so some similarities with what you've been talking about. And there were two elements to that. There was a master's studentship and a virtual internship scheme. And I'm sure we'll dig into those in details, but I'll just give a quick example of what each of those were. So the master's scholarships were year-long. Students had their fees waived, they got a stipend. They were paired with a business who'd come to us with a current R&D need, and they worked on that R&D need based on what their kind of skill set was. So we put a call out to businesses. They come back to us and we would match them with suitable master students. They would go off for the year. They'd have to spend 6 months working in the business, working on that kind of R&D need. And those students have a number of those students have then gone on to work in those businesses. So again, just giving that business the kind of creative capacity that it doesn't have when it's thinking about bringing new service experience or kind of product to the market. This is one example here. This was a theatre company called the Wardrobe Ensemble, who wanted to look at what happens, or, what are the new possibilities around combining immersive technology to sort of bring real and virtual theatre sort of productions and new experiences to life. So they worked with one of our master students to do that. I just thought it was a suitably enigmatic slide. And then secondly, the micro internships, very different. They were only 3 to 5 days, all done completely virtually. COVID started that, but we continued with it afterwards because it was a really nice low burden way for businesses to engage with students, so they didn't have to find a desk for them. They engaged with them twice a week through Zoom calls, and the rest of the time they were being looked after by lecturers. So sort of light touch internship, very short, sharp, but again it was around a specific project that the business was wanting to solve. And again, somebody else, we've got Trigger in the room here, I think, somewhere. We had a student working on their With You project, creating the animation for that fantastic project. So there were some really lovely projects coming out of that. But both schemes really kind of focusing on giving that kind of additional capacity, capability, and injecting the kind of technology over the top.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. I'm going to abuse chair's privilege for a minute and explore some issues with the panel myself. But please do raise your hands in a moment, and we'll start bringing audience members in for some questions. But Chris, I'd just like to kind of follow up, and I'll let you pour your water. Because, and I'll also extend the time a little bit by saying thank you for digging your car out, because that means you're here with us today. But I think there's two really good examples there of how the university has brought some of its kind of expertise and capabilities to bear in terms of the local creative economy. And I just wonder if you could just say a little bit more about how that putting students into companies and enterprises to support their R&D has helped those enterprises. What difference it's made to them?
Yeah. And I suppose just to step back a bit as well. So when I joined, we wanted to try and get this whole kind of ethos of student knowledge exchange working throughout the entire school as it was now, and we're doing it through the entire faculty. So it really was a philosophy of what we wanted to do. So a knowledge exchange rather than sort of kind of work experience, I suppose. And that's where the kind of real value is, that you're not just plonking these students in a business for a week or 2 weeks and they're making cups of coffee. There's a real kind of exchange of knowledge. They're getting that experience of working somewhere, what it's like to be in the workplace, and the business is actually getting that kind of like, oh, this is what creativity can do, or this is what technology can do for me, this is what this additional capacity could do to sort of my business in terms of kind of innovating. And I think the benefit was that it was a very low barrier to entry. I was free. So we sort of said, come and try this out. It's not going to cost you anything. Come and try this out, and if you like it, then you can kind of carry on with it. If not, you've not lost anything out of it. And I think what the businesses saw through those kind of collaborations was what they get out of having those sorts of people from different disciplines from their own coming in, and the sort of how that kind of changes the kind of discussion, changes the kind of outcome of where they might go as a business in the future.
And you shifted, as you were saying, you shifted some of that under the kind of pressure of the pandemic, but you've kept some of that going. And what did you take from that pandemic experience? You said, right, we need to do stuff differently in the world we're going into now.
So it's interesting. So higher education has been in stasis for God knows how long now. It's been managing to avoid the sort of technological revolution for a long time. And COVID, miraculously within a week, we all managed to go online and deliver virtually and have these sort of Zoom sessions, etc., etc. So that kind of burning platform really kind of forced us to work differently, and it opened up. People didn't have a choice. So it opened up a lot of different ways of working, which we have very purposely held on to now. So we were very clear that once everything goes back to face, we're not just going back to face. There was a lot that kind of came through. We saw the stats showed that BAME students and disabled students actually did much better through those types of learning. So through the pandemic, they're learning, and which is now going back. So the sort of attainment gaps are opening back up again because of the types of learning that we're going back to, even though we're in that kind of hybrid space. So I think we're just trying to hold on to as much of that as possible. But it was that kind of burning platform that gave us there was no choice, so we had to kind of do it.
Great, thank you. Jabba, if I could just come to you for a second. You mentioned when you were introducing the Worcester Mela that you were talking about the support you'd had from organisations with the city and kind of regionally and nationally. And you're recognising how that made a difference to what you were able to achieve. But you're a community-based, new, voluntary-led organisation. That's clearly important to you, but clearly you can help these bigger organisations to do more, to get creativity to people's lives and across the community. What do you think you offer those larger organisations? I'm thinking perhaps in particular, you've been working closely with the NHS. They see a value in partnering with you.
Yeah, the support that we received was quite invaluable because, in an arts setting, having no previous experience, learning to write bids, learning to understand the arts landscape and how you deliver projects, it's a real experience, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. But we with the support that we received from advocacy, from Seven Arts and from the CDF, that made that process a little bit easier. They sort of oversaw the process rather than sort of manage the process, which meant that the volunteers that we'd got on board were able to take it on. And I think increasingly what we found was in expanding our horizons and reaching out to other organisations within the city, whether that be the university or that there was a space and a need for our services for them. Because they really haven't had a route in or a way into those hard-to-reach communities and how to communicate. And as I mentioned before, from a city council perspective and a lot of other tick box exercises of trying to engage with the community, and some of that strategy isn't the most appropriate for those communities, and we offered a way in for that. Hence why we found that actually in that space a lot of organisations wanted to work with us. And then the NHS is a classic example. If any of you have managed to work with them, the bureaucracy and the red tape that you have to go through to even get a pen moved from one side of the table to the other, you can just imagine our task was really, really impossible. And going back to the first point made by David Blake about connections and keeping those connections close, we found a way in through one of the trustees on the board who brought into that vision and understood what we were trying to do. And it's something that they needed to do at the same time as well. So we married up really, really quickly. And the same with the university. So we may not have the technical skills, the ability, or the language that's been spoken from a professional side, but we have insights and we have ways and means into building relationships and understanding those communities that a lot of large organisations don't. So don't ever belittle the value of somebody from a community organisation, because they may possess something invaluable that you've never got.
Brilliant, thanks, Jabba. And I think interesting as well there, I mean, you clearly set out the value of the community organisations and the voluntary sector, but interesting that your way into the NHS was a trustee as well, so I'm assuming also somebody working in a voluntary capacity, and we've got to think about the value of all those people at all the different levels given their time. Yeah. Great, thank you. I was just going to come to you, Alice, just to ask a quick question, because you've got quite a focus, haven't you, on young people, but also kind of place focus as well. So it's young people from places where, you know, that whole thing about talent's everywhere but opportunity isn't. How do you focus on those places? How do you decide where is it that you're going to work, and how do you make those connections with those places and the young people within them?
Yeah, so our kind of target demographic broadly was disengaged, disadvantaged, for want of a better word, youth. We started in April 2020 and kind of reflected on that at the time. All youth were disadvantaged by that, no matter where you were from or your backgrounds. But really, in terms of prioritising places and where we were looking for people, the data's already there, and I think a lot of people think when you start a new project, you have to gather all this data yourself, and you have to do surveys, and you have to, find your audiences. There's a wealth of data out there already to help you find those audiences. So we followed that data and prioritised areas of sort of high youth unemployment, of which we have many in the estuary, high youth unemployment, high levels of deprivation, low levels of social mobility, and really, focused in on those areas. That's not to say we didn't do anything in the other areas that had slightly less need, but definitely focused our energies in those areas. And then within that, looking to engage people who are hard to reach. We kind of identified organisations then in those areas that were already either doing good work already, had kind of a track record of delivering really good work with young people, or could evidence an understanding of where these young people were coming from, and an enthusiasm and an ability to support them in a work placement or in a training programme. And then reaching the young people themselves, we relied a lot on gateway organisations like youth groups, charities, the Department of Work and Pensions, Prince's Trust, all those kinds of organisations that are already engaging with the groups that we want to engage with. We don't need to go out and buy them. There's already these organisations there, that they're trusted by those young people. Instead of us going in as a new person they don't know, with this new thing, we're going through a gateway organisation. But finding the individual within that organisation is key. So not just like blanketing, the Department of Work and Pensions, you're not going to find the right job coach. So that was a large part of my work, was finding those individuals who were really engaged and really keen and really understood the work that we were trying to do. And there's the spoiler alert, at the end of our film, there's a really nice moment where one of our participants, Daniela, he says, a year ago, I didn't want to leave my house, I didn't want to work, and now I don't want to stay at home, and that's lovely. That's exactly the impact that we wanted to have.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm also hearing as well from what you're talking about there that there's a process you go through, there's the organisations you need to go through, but somebody needs to find the person to talk to, and clearly that was what you added. So, having Alice would seem to be a key thing within this as well. Stephen, just coming to you. You're working really closely with the business community in Wakefield, and that's going out there and meeting the needs of a market. Can you tell me how working with kind of creative businesses in Wakefield, how do you understand their needs? How do you approach them and find out what they want and think about how you tailor what you offer to them? And how might that have changed you as a university?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I mean, before the leadership program, we'd got a questionnaire engagement to find out what people are, what are the skills gaps, what are the things that people are looking for. But as a university, we're regularly doing this in all manner of projects. So we've also had a HLF project with heritage organisations where we go through the same kind of process. So I think the key, and I think that idea about getting the right people, because I think universities often have inward-looking people and outward-looking people, the nature of the roles that, obviously in universities. And I think it's important to establish who are the outward-looking people, because they're perhaps more, able to move more quickly and more rapidly and in a more agile manner to work with businesses. And I think sometimes businesses have been frustrated when they've connected with more sort of teaching-oriented members of staff and are concerned that the university seems slow and not able to respond. And unfortunately, it's often because they've not really connected with the right kind of parts of the university But for me, a lot of, and I talk to my colleagues about the value of these kinds of development programs and educational programs that are not just about imparting knowledge. It's about every class, every workshop, every classroom, every space that I'm in with participants is an opportunity for me to learn about what their issues are and what their priorities are. And so that it's really important to see those opportunities when they present themselves.
Great, thank you. And again, we're hearing the importance of getting the right individual to be having the conversations. And Chris, I saw you nodding there, so I'm assuming this is shared in other universities.
Yeah, we had to, part of what we did was we created a sort of a crack team, a little unit, which was the sort of outward-facing people, and they weren't academics. And that's absolutely key.
I told you this is good panel off lunch. This is the A-team. We'll solve any problem you've got. Okay, so thanks. I'm going to stop abusing chair's privilege now and hand over to the audience. I'm just wondering if people could stick your hands up if there's any questions, and a mic will find its way to you.
Sorry, I went before, so I didn't want to put my hand up. I'm David Dobson from the Arts Development Company in Worcester. You've spoken about the importance of individuals and individual relationships. I'm thinking about long-term partnerships, especially from an Arts Council's point of view. And how do you build long-term partnerships when you've got to work with organisations where the individuals might then change and then you've got to deal with somebody else? And how do you strike the balance between dealing with individuals and dealing with organisations?
I think that was slightly directed at me, so I'll go. Shall I go first and then hand over to guys? I think from our perspective, taking that place-based approach is absolutely fundamental, and we won't be the leaders within place. We will work alongside the leaders within place, and we will enable the cultural sector to play its part. And I think today, I hope colleagues on the A-team will agree with me that the CDF kind of epitomises that way of working. But you absolutely need the right leadership that's able to access the right parts of people, business, and the community, and I think that I forgot his name, but the managing director of Worcester, are you still here? Sorry, David. Yeah, his point about the importance of the relationships that are in place and building on those rather than creating anything new and working with what's there. But I also think that kind of across here, we've got kind of indications of the sorts of organisations to make a difference there. So I think HEI is absolutely fundamental to this, and increasingly so. And then I think the kind of activating role that I think Alice plays, that within a place where there's a number of partnerships, or I think possibly reflecting on the estuary as well. What is the estuary? It's Medway's a place. Essex is a place. There's structures around that. Somebody needs to kind of, work closely with partners in those places to activate it. And I think, that's the kind of way we seek to work as well. And I think your point, Jabba, around the absolutely fundamental role of talking with voluntary organisations to give you access to the community, because if you miss those voices, you miss legitimacy as well as insight. So I'll just hand over to the panel now.
Yeah, I think Beck's a really good point, because a lot of, if you're talking in a I suppose from an application point of view, in terms of that and your relationship manager with Arts Council, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? In terms of one man's gold is another man's scrap, etc., etc. And you do get that variances in terms of the relationships you build with people, and somebody moves on and then takes over and might see it with a different lens. So it's important that you get that consistency in relationships and people understanding at the Arts Council of what the project, where it's kind of started from and where it's kind of going. So that journey isn't lost when it gets transferred to another case officer, so to speak. But it does fundamentally about you maintaining your relationships, following up those conversations, making sure that they're aware of what the latest developments in your projects are and changes, and then that will stand you in real good stead.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. There's partnership development and then there's partnership maintenance, and that takes a lot of work, and you really need to think about it. And I would say getting a solid communications plan right at the beginning of the project, knowing who you need to communicate with and when, that really helps keep that maintaining those relationships. And when you know someone's going to move on to a different organisation, find out where they're going, because they may still be engaged, but also find out who's going to replace them and make the effort to meet with that person straight away, as soon as they're in post. We saw a lot of that in the organisations that we were working with just people leaving and coming in, but we've managed to maintain those relationships and get buy-in from the people that were coming in at an early stage.
I think it's a risk if only that one individual in that institution believes in what's happening. And I think that was the big thing down in Plymouth, was how do you set this as a long-term strategy / philosophy that's not a 3-year project, it's a 10, 20-year project, and that everybody's brought into that across the kind of ecology or the ecosystem. So it doesn't matter if one person leaves, the person that comes in behind them, there's a greater weight, I suppose, a kind of culture, I suppose, that they're buying into, and that hopefully that's why they're there as well. So yeah, absolutely is a risk if you're solely reliant on that individual to kind of make the entire project work.
Hi, it's Laura Wilsod from 7 Arts. It's been brilliant to hear about everybody's project. One thing I think we haven't cracked is the business community in the same way as other partners. So we've talked a lot about institutions and partnerships with universities, but I wondered if the panel had anything to say about how we engage the business community in terms of investing in place when that's tricky and times are tricky, and in terms of what the conversation around legacy, how that might pan out in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. So a question there about how we practically engage with the business community. Stephen, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's really interesting that in the creative sector, it's the business community is characterised not by SMEs but by micro-organisations and freelancers. So unlike the rest, other sectors, the creative sector, 60% are micro-organisations, 10 or less people. 30% are freelancers. And as you say, because of the very small size, there's little capacity to innovate. In terms of the internal staffing and capacity. And so I think it's really important for those businesses to have success stories visible, to show how by working with larger organisations, partner organisations, universities, community groups, that can actually add capacity to them in terms of diversifying what they do or innovating and changing the kinds of things that they engage with. So I think, that those success stories, the kind of case studies that we see in those success stories are really important to communicate the values for those in our sector are often characterised by very, very small outfits that are struggling to even deliver, let alone innovate and change how they deliver.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is to provide them with something they want as well. So often we get this type of money and we dream up some product that we then try and sell to a market that doesn't need it, doesn't want it. And I think there was a lot of time and effort spent in terms of working out what it is that would make some of the differences in terms of what we were trying to do in Plymouth. So I think making sure that it's something they want, and then something I mentioned earlier is that the kind of low barrier to entry is if there's no cost to them, whether that's a lot of time or money, it makes it easier for you to sort of engage with them I mean, one of the things we have difficulty with is that the universities do have a bad rep in terms of not being agile, not being responsive, not delivering. And I think through this project, we've built up a kind of portfolio that shows that's not true. So if you can kind of point to those examples where we have added value. So it's quite difficult in the first instance, but what you find is sort of pushing that boulder to the top of the hill, and then by the end of it, we couldn't keep up with the demand for what was coming to us, but actually making the point in the first place was quite tricky.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a little bit more difficult here in Worcester, but certainly in large areas. I think there's a real case for that actually. Where do arts organisations go for support and funding? And we should look outside the traditional box. I mean, traditionally we go out to other charities and trustee organisations and look in that sector. Well, actually the business sector is prime example. Certainly from a development and construction point of view, a lot of these are large organisations now as part of developments. Employ social value posts in terms of actually what benefit their development's going to do out in the landscape. And we've got, from an arts perspective, we've got a real case to actually tap in to those people in those positions to say, actually, have you looked here? This is what we can be able to do. And then that becomes a package for a developer who's developing a large site within the city to say, this is the total package that we're getting. And then and these are, nationally set guidelines from government that they have, criteria that they have to meet. And it's we just need to, I suppose, better way of reaching out to some of those large construction projects within your various areas and just saying, actually, this is how we can add value to your project.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with those comments. I suppose the other thing is kind of communicating the value to the organisations, a bit like what Chris said, communicating why they should get involved, what they'll get out of it, rather than just what the wider picture of what the young people get out of it, or what the wider community will get out of it, is what the organisations will benefit from. So, the ones that we work with, it was really communicating like this is an opportunity for you to grow your practice or grow your business, and yeah, that seemed to have helped.
Brilliant, thanks, Alice. I think we've got another question here. And then there's one at the back.
Yeah, I was going to ask one question, but then you answered that question, so I'm going to ask another question. And it's really about the university industry interface and how well or badly that is done in the UK. I think the third leg of the relationship is involving financial institutions and how you're going to back new and good ideas. So in the past we've worked with individual universities, we've worked with individual departments in individual universities. But if you work with a company, they don't necessarily align with a particular department and a departmental set of skills. Yeah. So to have the ability to have a conversation with that company in the round to see the potential of that company, and for you to have channels within the universities to engage with, to explore with that company. It's the innovation agenda, but maybe something like the Cultural Development Fund and external funding has got a role to play in creating that middle ground, because universities don't necessarily have all the time in the world to communicate to particular academics, but it needs some kind of clearinghouse approach where companies can better engage with universities to get a better result for small companies.
So no pressure there, but can you solve the relationship between universities and the private sector?
So the government's current skills agenda is driving that anyway. So the lifelong loan entitlement that they're opening up and their access participation plan, it's all about smaller bite-sized chunks of learning which are sort of more industry engaged. So things like apprenticeships, for example. It's a now tripartite relationship between industry, the student as the learner, and the university. So industry is being brought much more into the kind of mix, and I think with the kind of short courses or the micro credentials which are going to be developed, they're much more aimed at sort of CPD type provision. So I think universities are having to shift to deal with that kind of agenda, and we are seeing that. Students are looking more for things like apprenticeships or, smaller bite-sized chunks of learning, particularly postgraduate level. Postgraduate home market has really kind of taken a nosedive and being able to take smaller chunks of learning at that postgraduate level is a sort of buoyant market. So I think that you will find, so what we're looking at is we're looking at different types of academics or different types of individuals who are going to have to deliver this, because an academic's not necessarily the best person to deliver an apprenticeship, for example. So I think you're going to find different types of individuals starting to appear in universities that are aligning themselves with having to provide to that gender.
It's one of those perennial issues, and I often think that engaging with the university is much more like engaging with a cluster than it is an organisation. And if you imagine just heading into a cluster and trying to figure out who's doing what, and it's very much like that. But I completely agree that the CDF funding that we were a delivery partner on one project for Wakefield CDF funding, but even that was enough to really quite radically change how the university saw what it should be doing in terms of CPD. So the old model was we build it and they will come, of we make this course and we'll see who wants to enroll on the course, to a much more co-creative, collaborative and bespoke relationship where we actually build something that is, suits the needs of a particular organisation. And that's totally changed a lot of the way that the university internally is thinking about how that works.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. I'm sorry, Jabba and Alice, if you were going to jump in there, but Colin was coming in there, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Hi, this is really, really inspiring. And I was just wondering, are there any, how can I put this easily, politely, are there any small mistakes that you'd like to admit to, which we could all learn from? No, that's a serious question, because a small mistake can make a big difference. Thank you.
I think a small mistake right at the beginning was being too flexible. Being too flexible with our placement scheme. And we just took feedback from the organisations that we were working with and changed it for phase 2 so it was more structured. We were trying to be responsive to the industry, knowing that they all work, all these businesses, they all work differently, these individuals, they all work differently. So listening to the people that you're working with, making it an iterative process is really important, and being flexible with the process and not necessarily sticking rigidly to what you've kind of set out at the beginning. That's my one piece of advice.
I'll go next. So I think underestimating how much advocacy work had to go into convincing other sectors that the creative industries had something valuable to provide them. There was so much time and effort that went into liaising with businesses. We thought, well, we're offering them this thing and they'll jump at it. But it was a real kind of struggle, uphill struggle to get them to sort of acknowledge that they might find it useful.
Probably hundreds of little mistakes in there. I mean, probably hundreds of little mistakes that you learn, but you adapt and you kind of learn. I suppose the one that's probably affected us the most is just probably not being decisive enough in circumstances when a decision that is needed to be made, and once it's kind of festers and takes root and infiltrates your other decisions, then you've made a mistake, right? And then trying to remove it is really, really difficult because it's settled in and set in. So trying to be more decisive when you need to be, and sometimes being ruthless.
If I could answer this from my boss's point of view, he would say Steve's made loads of mistakes in the fact that he's completely disregarded university systems and processes and just gone on with this without proper sign-off. And sometimes you kind of need to do that, I think.
And if I can add one for the Arts Council, it's that I think at the early doors in this, we should have talked more to other government departments about how our funding lines up with theirs. I think some of the stuff we heard today from about how UK Shared Prosperity Fund, for example, could line up with other government funding programmes. I know that's a perennial point raised by partners in localities anyway. I think we can use the evidence of this to help make that case. And at that point, the panel have been brilliant. Can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you.